Associated students of Cerritos College and the Cerritos College Department of Theater and Film present You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. Directed by Jerry Prell, with choreography by Steve Rosa and musical direction by Hector Salazar. The show plays this weekend at the Burnite Center Studio Theater on the Cerritos College campus. For play dates, times, and tickets, go to cerritos.edu/theater and make a date to spend an evening with Charlie Brown, Lucy, Linus, Snoopy, and the rest of your favorites at Cerritos College. You get us on iTunes, on TuneIn, on Shoutcast, and on the WPMD app because you get us. Everything you want to hear from the voice at Cerritos College. WPMD on the net, where people make a difference.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Falcon Spotlight. I'm your host, Rob Flores, here at Cerritos College at WPMD Studios, where people make a difference. At this time, I'd like my guest to please introduce himself.
My name is Frank Hauptmann.
Excellent. Now, the first thing I usually ask my guests is, start off from the beginning. What was K-12 like? High school? Were you involved in a particular type of thing that was like your interest, your hobby, like a sport or music, whatever it was?
Yes, I actually come from an immigrant family from Germany and arrived here when I was born. Lived in South Central Los Angeles and later moved to the city of Downey when I was 8 years old. And I went to Catholic school actually for the first 4 years, and that was quite an experience. That's at a time when the nuns were the ones with the rulers that would smack your hands and lock you in the closet. And with all of that nightmarish stuff, I finally convinced my parents to let me go to the public school, which my older brother and my sister went to. So my experiences in throughout school in Downey was just, it was great. I went to West Junior High School, and I was in the band. I loved playing music, so I was a drummer and started organizing small little garage bands, probably when I was in the 8th grade, 9th grade. We played at little talent shows at the junior high school. And then, of course, I advanced on to high school, which I went to Warren High School. There's 2 high schools in Downey. And during that time in high school, I continued to play in bands, doing a variety of different kinds of music. I actually liked rock and roll in the beginning, but then it was jazz. And back to rock and roll. And I actually had an opportunity one time with playing in a backup band for a 50s, 60s guy who was trying to make a comeback in the late 60s. And his name was Freddie Boom Boom Cannon. That was probably the greatest experience I had. But when I was in high school, I was in theater, and I kind of was a shy person until I went into the theater, and I was actually able to accelerate when I was in theater. So we did improvs. I was in several different plays between the 10th and the 12th grade. I was a sports guy too. I liked football. That was, as far as sports were concerned. I mean, I played sports throughout the entire time of grade school through middle school, but then when it got to the bands, it was not as big of a deal. And during my tenure in high school, people always start asking, where are you going to go to college, or what is it that you want to do? And there was one common thread that I found was always in the back of my mind as to what I wanted to do, and that is law enforcement, being a police officer. But when you're in high school, you start thinking about other things, because I enjoyed the acting so much. I thought, well, maybe that, but I realized that is quite a struggle for people, and maybe not the kind of influences of individuals that I thought I could be around. And professional music was just another option. And then I thought, well, maybe a lawyer, or maybe law school. But the common theme had always been being a police officer. Now, When I was in my junior year in high school, I had enough credits to where I really didn't need to go to my high school all day. So I started taking classes here at Cerritos College in 1970. And of course, I felt pretty cool because I thought, well, I'm a junior in high school, and here I am actually taking a college class, a couple of college classes. And also, while I was in high school and then in my initial time here in Cerritos, I considered photography. Now, I enjoyed doing photography. I had my own dark room and did a variety of different kinds of photography. And I thought maybe that's the way to go. But then again, it was that common thread of being a police officer that stayed in the back of my mind. And I thought, well, if you really like photography, you can actually go into police work as doing police, photography in the sciences lab or something to that effect. I mean, I was all over the board. The one thing that I think I lacked was having someone that I could use as a mentor, which I came upon later, and it was a police lieutenant in the city of Downey, and his son we went to junior high school together, we went to high school together, and so having known his father, I actually went for some direction. One thing that I struggled with, and people laugh at it now, is I had a tough time if I wanted to be a police officer in the sense that there was a height limit. And I was just barely making 5'8". And many departments were at 5'10" minimum. CHP was 6 foot. And Downey came down to 5'9". Other agencies it was at a time that it was fluctuating. Well, then I thought photography might be the way to go. And I had a girlfriend actually at the time that couldn't understand why I would want to be a police officer and risk my life and things like that. Why would I do such a thing? And that wasn't the right direction. Photography, you're so good at it. So I applied at Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, which took 25 students a year from all over the world. And then typically, if you were accepted, it was a 2-year waiting list. And so I applied, I was accepted, and 6 months before I was to attend, I went there to go through the campus. This girlfriend of mine at the time, she went with me, and when she was talking about all the wonderful things of photography, quite honestly, while I was there, I was thinking, I really think I want to be a police officer. And it was that particular visit at that time that we were actually having a meal before we came back to Downey, and I was staring out the window, and what I was actually looking at was a police car that was parked across the street, and it looked like an officer was in there writing a police report, something to that effect. And I kept staring at the car and thinking, that's really what I want to do. And then, of course, this girl looked at me and she said, I'll bet you're not even looking at another woman across the street. It's probably a policeman somewhere. And she turned around and there was a police car, and she said, I don't really know what direction you want to go, but I'm not wanting you to go in that direction. I thought, well, who are you to tell me, really? Long story short, I figured that was the path. So I enrolled, when I graduated from high school, I enrolled in the Administration of Justice program here at Cerritos College. And I figured that agencies were starting to fluctuate with their height, so by the time I was finished, I would be able to do what I needed to do to become an officer. So while I was here at Cerritos, I worked in a men's clothing store in the Stonewood Shopping Center in Downey, known as Woody's, and then they had another store called One Step Up, which was more the mod clothing of the time in the era. And it was kind of interesting because Woody's was very, very well known in the Hollywood arena. And you had people like Don Rickles, the comedian, and Karen Carpenter, who would actually shop at these stores. So, given all of that, I came here and I ran into a couple of individuals that were getting their degree. And, at the time, they were police officers already. And I got to talking to them, and a couple of them said, well, why don't you come on a ride along see if this is really for you. Well, I went on a ride along with one of the guys that I had been going to class with, and he worked for the Bell Gardens Police Department at the time. So I went on this ride along in Bell Gardens, and after that ride along, I was convinced that this is the way to go. So I figured, all right, I'm going to finish my AA in the Administration of Justice. And I had people telling me, you'd probably be best served if you go and finish your bachelor's degree before you actually get into police work. And I was just too excited about getting into the workforce and getting into that job that I wanted. And actually, at the time that I was here at Cerritos College, there was a flyer that I saw on campus advertising for a police cadet for the city of Cypress in Orange County, and the height was 5'8". I thought, oh my gosh, I may have a chance here. So I applied for that position and got it. And as a police cadet in Cyprus, I started to go on ride-alongs there, but I was working in the dispatch center. I did a variety of different things. I was taking reports out in the field of a minor nature, things like that. And Cyprus had figured, well, we hired you as a cadet, so we assume you'll stay with us to become a police officer. At that time, LAPD was the primary main agency, and it was a very well-respected department. They had a lot of specialties, a lot of things that you could do. So I figured I'm going to apply at LAPD. So I did. I passed everything until I got to the medical. Now, with the medical, they came down to 5'8", and when they first measured me, I wasn't quite cutting that 5'8", and I was trying to stretch myself. I had people telling me, go to a chiropractor, have them stretch your body, lay down in a van, and have them drive you to your medical. I thought, what is that, insane? Others were telling me, just hang on bars, and your body will stretch itself. Well, given all of that, I passed it. And I was excited, thinking, gosh, I'm finally getting there. I got the biggest worry for me was the height and the weight, because I just made it. And then I had this cyst on my tailbone that I was told, well, you're going to have that surgically removed, and then we'll continue processing you, but we can't process you further until that's done. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I thought it was going to be my height. So here, anyway, I went ahead and had that done. It was miserable. And during the time I was recuperating from that, a friend of mine here at Cerritos, a couple of them, said, hey, we're going out to the city of Glendale. We're going to apply there. They're going to hire 6 police officers. And at the time, it was difficult. We had guys coming back from Vietnam or coming out of the military. There was extra points being given to those that were just coming out of the military. I had a high draft number at the time, and so I didn't get drafted, although I later did go into the Naval Reserve and spent 17 years in the Naval Reserve as an intelligence officer. But anyway, I finally had this opportunity when Glendale passed me through everything. I came out number 3 on the list. They had 500 or 600 applicants at the time, and I was really excited. And once I went through the medical there, the doctor told me, well, we wouldn't have had you remove that cyst if you would have come here first. As miserable as that was, I thought, all right, I went through it, I had it done. I just want to get into being a police officer. And I'll never forget the phone call from Glendale PD that I got from the sergeant in personnel and training, who said, it was a Saturday morning, it was 10 o'clock, and pick up the phone, and he said, this is Sergeant, I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but anyway, I knew who he was because he was doing all the processing, and he said, do you still want to be a Glendale police officer? And I said, yes, of course. This is my dream. And so he says, well, we want to hire you. We'll get you sworn in, and you'll be going to the LA County Sheriff's Academy as a full sworn police officer. At that time, they would swear you in. You were actually a full-fledged sworn-in police officer the day that you went to the academy, which hasn't been done in ages. But and I think back, that was kind of a crazy thought to you go into the academy, you're just a recruit cadet, yet you're walking around armed and even carrying concealed weapon off duty. That was a department policy at the time. And I went to the academy, and I knew that it was going to be difficult, but I said, there's nothing that's going to stop me. So, although I was at the shorter end of the entire, of the platoons and everything, because I was the short guy, there were others, though, that were at that level, because LA County Sheriffs came down to 5'8" at that time as well. We started out with 135 cadets, and we graduated 77 6 months later. And coming from Glendale, we went for 4.5 months, and then we went to our stations. Everyone from the outside went to their own stations, and we started in our field training process while the sheriff's cadets were going through a jail orientation. And then we had to come back for graduation. And the interesting thing is, if you graduated in the top 5 of your class, if you were from an outside agency, we were told the sheriff's are going to try and recruit you if you're in that top 5. And it actually happened, and I was asked, hey, would you consider just staying on as a deputy sheriff? And I thought, you know what? Glendale gave me the chance of a lifetime. And the one thing that I did want to ask is, if I actually did this, went to the sheriff's department, would I have to work in the jail? And they said, well, yes. And I said, how long would I spend in the jail? He said, well, 5 or 6 years before you go to patrol. I said, well, thank you, but no thank you. So off I went to Glendale, and I started my career there, and I finished my AA degree at Cerritos College. And for those that are considering law enforcement in this day and age, I strongly suggest you get your bachelor's degree before you start. Typically, you won't get hired until you're 21, 22. The average person coming in is 26. And you have the opportunity and the time, because it took me 18 years to get my bachelor's degree, because you're trying to balance having a full-time job, family, and then you're trying to go to college, and you're in shifts, and shifts change sometimes mid semester. So it was a struggle, but I finally accomplished it. And I say that because in law enforcement, a lot of people think, well, I just want to get my foot in the door and get in there, then I'll get my education. It's extremely difficult in law enforcement with the kind of shift work, the kind of assignments that you get, to really be able to finish that out. And I've just seen so many people struggle with it for years and years. Some just completely gave up. And so if I can give one piece of advice out there, go for that bachelor's degree, because there is going to come a time that once you get your foot in the door, there's going to come a time that you're going to say, I want to promote. I mean, I want to be a supervisor, a sergeant. I want to be a lieutenant. I want to be a captain or a commander, and I want to move up. If you don't have a bachelor's degree, you will not be able to go or progress beyond being a sergeant, because in pretty much every department that I know of, if you're going to test for a management position, which is lieutenant and above, you have to have a bachelor's degree. So that's why I say it. Now, let me just give an example. My son is a Glendale police officer, and when he was going through high school, and he actually wasn't really thinking that much about being a police officer, and until I introduced him to the Explorer program. Police Explorers, it was in existence at the time that I was actually trying to become an officer, but no one ever told me about it. I knew nothing about it. Downey didn't have an Explorer post, and so anyway, once my son got his feet wet in that Explorer program, all of a sudden he went from thinking about being or doing something in the area of technology with computers. He immediately thought, this is what I wanted to do. And he was an explorer at Garden Grove PD. He was then a police cadet. Once he graduated from high school, he had to take college courses. And I told him, before you go on to become an officer, please take my advice, and get your bachelor's degree. And he did that. He went to Cal State Fullerton. He completed his 4 years, 4.5, and he got his bachelor's degree. And he had friends that were cadets that would tell him, hey, we can get our bachelor's degree later. Let's all get in here at the same time. We'll start out as cops all at the same time. And he kept saying, no, my dad told me about the struggle, and I remember the struggles. So now he's been out there for 10 years. And he's about to be promoted to sergeant here in July. And a lot of the guys he started with, they are now struggling of trying to get their bachelor's degree, and they look at him saying, I should have listened to what you had to say, because I'm struggling with going to school, finishing this. It's a real hassle, on and on and on. And he said, well, I'm glad I listened to what my dad said. But anyway, at Glendale, as I started my career, I worked patrol, and I had an opportunity to advance to as an investigator to the Special Enforcement Bureau, Special Enforcement Detail. And it was more of a street felony team. We did a multitude of different things. You were plain clothes, not necessarily undercover. And during that time, I just worked a variety of different assignments. And the one thing that started me on the track of wanting to be an investigator is our unit was, at that time, in the 70s, when I went in there in 1977, we had a serial killers known as the Hillside Strangler. And there were bodies being left of females in Glendale, La Crescenta, and Glendale patrolled part of La Crescenta. And you had the city of Los Angeles and LA sheriffs. So my unit was then attached to the Hillside Strangler Task Force. And my partner and I were then put into an assignment of working in the task force, doing follow-up on leads. And I remember a sergeant once telling me, if you want to be a good detective, if you really want to know what you're doing, you have to look and follow those two lead guys, one from LA Sheriff's, the other one was from LAPD. And I listened to that. I learned so much from these individuals by just keeping my mouth shut. I sat back and I listened, and we continued to work for it. As many people know, if you ever followed the Hillside Strangler, it eventually was a case that was adjudicated. 2 individuals were subsequently and finally arrested, but by that time, I had already left Glendale PD and lateral transferred to Garden Grove. I was living in Seal Beach and driving to Glendale, and I thought, do I want to do this 20 years from now? So being closer, I decided that I would kind of look around in the area. So I applied at Long Beach and Huntington Beach, Anaheim, Garden Grove, and Garden Grove picked me up quick. And so I went over to Garden Grove and started out in patrol once again. Having given the experience that I had, I excelled in the assignments that I had. One of my strengths was report writing. I took that really serious because I actually had a minor in journalism while I was at Cerritos College. And I liked writing, so I thought, okay, this is something that is my strength. And so I was a field training officer, and then I had also thought I wanted to work undercover. And I had finally the opportunity came up where there were vacancies. I put in for it, I tested, I came out number 1 on the list for narcotics. And I went into narcotics working undercover. And I did that assignment for nearly 5 years. And here's something that I just found kind of funny, is that I love the theater and doing the acting and everything else, but I thought, when would you really ever use it? Well, here was my opportunity, because as an undercover detective, I had to play a variety of different roles. And I took my acting and used my acting in playing the different roles that I had. I would just assume a character. I would be able to have a name with identification that went to that name. And I was doing a bunch of different cases in purchasing and buying cocaine undercover, and also heroin in some of the low-income areas. when I was buying heroin, I had to dress real grubby and dirty. My hair was long, and I'd let it get greasy, and I had a full beard. At the time, that was kind of the look. And one thing is, it was an area called Buena Clinton in the city of Garden Grove, and it had the highest crime rate per capita in all of Orange County at the time. It was a very dangerous place to be. And so my team and I, we would do heroin buys down there. And what would happen is you could drive 300 yards on one street, and you'll be hit up by 12, 15 different dealers, all standing out on the street. And there was typically a signal that they had stuff. They'd nod their head in a certain way. Some would pull their T-shirt up, and that meant they were dealers. There were just a multitude of different things. And what we realized is that when you were going to buy from these guys, they would take you. They wouldn't do it right out on the street, so they'd walk you back into the carports. And when you were by yourself, it was very dangerous because there were dope and money ripoffs. People were stabbed, people were shot down there. And of course we had concealed guns with us. But when you went to the carports, you were out of sight of your surveillance team. And we didn't always wear body wires when we did this. So they weren't as sophisticated as they are now. But we always had a signal and a sign. If you're not visible within 30 seconds or 20 to 30 seconds, the team's going to just come running through there with raid gear on and start looking for you. So you always knew that if I couldn't get a deal done within 15, 20 seconds, then I have to show my face out there or they're going to come out running. And we didn't want to blow it. Now, some people may think we were crazy at the time, but when you have to play a role, you have to play it as best you can to the hilt and have the look and the talk. And one of the things we would do is we would take paper clips and we would kind of scrape our veins in the inner arm, take a number 2 lead pencil, rub it on there, and it would look exactly and identical to track marks that were the type that were inflamed and so on and so forth. Some people thought, are you guys out of your mind? I said, well, if you don't pull it off right, you can get yourself killed. And the moment because every time you wanted to buy the heroin from these guys, they said, let me see your tracks. You show them the tracks, that was it. We had these deals done in 15 seconds. So we would do these everyday deals twice a day for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'd have the big roundup day. So we had photographs of everyone, and they had a footbeat patrol officers down there that pretty much knew all the players, and they would just bring them into this substation we had down there. We'd be behind partitions, and they would bring them into the lobby, and whoever did a deal with a certain individual said, yeah, that's him, and so these guys were arrested. And it was interesting. They just were wondering, how did this happen? How did all of us wind up getting arrested in one day? So we took a lot of dealers off when we did these things at that one time. But they were always replaced by others, and it was just an ongoing battle. You could only try to control it. You figured you're never going to be able to get rid of it. But we would also be doing cocaine deals where we would have money flashes of $30,000 to $50,000. So now I would have to dress up, or my partners would dress up in much nicer clothes, fancy car, jewelry, and now we're negotiating $40,000, $100,000, $200,000 cocaine deals with money flashes and things like that. So I went through that whole episode. It was very, very interesting playing these different roles. But then I realized it's time to continue and start advancing my career and move on. So I tested for sergeant, and I was promoted to sergeant. And as I got promoted to sergeant, I went to patrol once again, and I was asked and tasked to develop a relationship with the Vietnamese and the Korean communities of Garden Grove. Garden Grove had a sector of Little Saigon, the Little Saigon Triangle, which has Westminster, Garden Grove, and a bit of Santa Ana in it. And that was south of the 22 Garden Grove Freeway. North of it was Little Seoul, which was Korean. And I thought, well, I just came out of narcotics, and I wasn't dealing with Asians at all. So I found it interesting that I'm now having to develop this relationship. And what was terrible is that this community was being terrorized by Asian gangs, their own people, that would do home invasion robberies. They would do home invasion robberies with sexual assaults. They would stay in a home for 4 or 5 hours. They would, at gunpoint, tell the woman of the house to make food for them and eat. And they wanted to eat while they were there. And some people thought, well, why is the police department actually putting so many resources into the Asian community? What about the rest of the community? Well, what a lot of people didn't understand is there was a unique crime pattern that was occurring in the Asian community, one that was not existing anywhere else. And these people were being targeted by Asian gangs of their own who understood the culture. And people coming from Vietnam, the only thing they knew is the law enforcement that they came from. And in Vietnam, for example, you just needed a sixth grade education to be a police officer, and there was a lot of corruption. Some people would just wind up disappearing, and especially with plainclothes officers, and they'd never be seen again. So there was this fear, and these gangsters knew that fear existed, and they would use that to their advantage, letting the families know, if you cooperate, we'll come back and execute everyone. And these people felt it's best not to say anything, just let things go. And sadly, in that culture, and even with the Koreans, if one of the females was sexually assaulted, that is a shame to the family. And so it was not something that was brought out as far as that happened during the home invasion. We had to figure that out, and it took a little extra time to make a determination if any of the females in the household were sexually assaulted or not. And of course, we did find in some instances, yes, they were, but they were ashamed. They didn't want to bring it out. They figured, well, we'll just tell you about the rest. People would ask, why are they actually calling the police if they're afraid of all of these things? Well, the reason that they would call is because they wanted the chaos to end. They wanted something that would just conclude the fear. And having the police there would allow them to clear that fear to a certain extent. But when it came time to cooperate, like showing mugshots, various kinds of evidence that would lead to someone, we'd show mugshots, you could see the look in their face. They're looking at the person that did this, but they're afraid to say anything. We figured that 80% of the businesses in Little Saigon at some point were subject to some form of extortion by these gangs. Asian gangs were not territorial.